Spaceballs 2, Gladiator 2, Lilo and Stitch, but worse. Shrek 5, Fast and Furious 10, 11, 23 Call of Duty games. It's no secret we live in a time of cash grab sequels and nostalgia bait reboots. For reasons that are too complicated to get into in this video, the current generation of media enjoyers, whether it be movies, shows, or video games, is subject to a never-ending carousel of the same stories, retold, reimagined, recast, reanimated, again and again. It seems that a franchise either dies while it's successful, or it lives long enough to overstay its welcome. But I want you to remember a time when sequels were more skillfully done, when they brought back what you loved about the first story, but introduced enough new things to keep the experience fresh and entertaining. The Two Towers, Empire Strikes Back, Shrek 2, Temple of Doom... Maybe not that one. All of these fantastic movies, all of them sequels. The second chapter in an overarching story. All these stories tend to do the same things. They follow the events of the first story chronologically. They have most, if not all, of the main characters from the previous story, but also introduce new characters who add something to the plot. There's a new conflict in the sequel that either continues the one from the previous story, or is connected in some meaningful way. Side characters from the first story get a chance to be fleshed out in the sequel. We take these storytelling devices for granted, and whether we are aware of it or not, we expect them when we engage with a sequel story. But where did that come from? Why do humans write stories in this way? The answer might be found in the famous story, the Odyssey. The ancient Greeks thousands of years ago wrote many myths and stories for a variety of reasons, and it's remarkable how many of those have survived through the millennia and made it to us today. But none of them are as famous as Homer's Odyssey, which is surprising because it's a sequel. You would think that the story most people know would be his first surviving work, the Iliad, given that it is the first in its series. But not so. The Odyssey, a tale of swashbuckling adventure, action, and tension, has made waves throughout the thousands of years it has been told on planet Earth. Why is that? How is it that this ancient sequel is such a globally influential work of literature? Let's try and answer that question. In order to understand why this voyaging story made waves, we have to try and understand the original audience and context. The ancient Mediterranean was a dangerous place. Just look at the geography of Greece. Even the most inexperienced sailor can tell that it's a complicated place to travel through. Anyone who set out across these waters risked their own life. Any captain who could successfully negotiate the waters would be a famous man. But a story of someone who sails through a storm and makes it through is not nearly as exciting as the story of the person who sails through the storm and fights monsters and magicians along the way. Out of this seafaring, superstitious, vain part of the ancient world comes the story of a man named Odysseus, trying to get home after being away 20 years. We've met him before. He was one of the chiefs fighting for the Greeks before the walls of Troy in the Iliad, the author Homer's first work of literature. Odysseus was a loyal, capable, and ruthless man in the Iliad, always doing what needed to be done in order to win the day, even at the risk of his own life. But his greatest asset is his mind. And this theme of Odysseus being a sly, crafty man comes up many times in the Odyssey. Whereas the Iliad focuses on raw strength and bravery being the defining mark of man, it is trickery, deception, and strategy that often wins the day in this story. Odysseus doesn't brute force his way through problems. He analyzes the situation and determines the best course of action in order to solve the puzzle before him. This direction Homer takes the story is a welcome one. letting the reader know that there are more important things in life than how big your muscles are. And we understand this concept very readily today. What good is the brawn without the brains? Despite much of ancient Greece certainly being a jock culture, there was also a side to them that enjoyed sitting down and talking of things like mathematics, philosophy, and architecture. What makes Odysseus such a compelling character to so many is how he combines the two. Nowhere is this more obvious than in the story of Polyphemus, the Cyclops. Odysseus and his men are trapped in the cave of a giant Cyclops after going through all of his stuff. After several of them are eaten alive, Odysseus tricks the Cyclops by getting him drunk. The drunken creature asks Odysseus his name, to which our protagonist replies, "No one. My name is No One." This leads to a hilarious scene where, after using his immense strength to blind the one-eyed Cyclops Polyphemus with a spear in his eye, the Cyclops bellows in rage and creates a great noise. His neighboring Cyclops come to ask Polyphemus who's attacking him, to which he replies, "No one is attacking me." Hearing this, they think, "Okay, I guess he's fine in there," and leave. Then Odysseus and his men escape by clutching the undersides of some sheep and hiding beneath their great wool, eventually making it back to the ship. It's a fantastic part of the story. Odysseus combined wits with strength to save him and his remaining men from becoming the Cyclops' next meal. Anyone wishing to excel in either strength or cunning can learn both from reading just one segment of this story. Another reason the Odyssey is so influential over Western literature and even global literature is because many of the classic story types come from the Odyssey. Homer makes extensive use of flashbacks in order for Odysseus to relate his travels to the people hosting him shortly before he arrives home. The narrative goes back and forth between Odysseus telling the story, showing us how the crowd reacts to his tales, and then to the story he's transporting us to. We are there with Odysseus in both past and present, wondering now what the future holds for him, as his travels are not yet done. We see the archetype of the hero's journey as Odysseus braves many dangers on his way home. Monsters, magicians, men, all show up as roadblocks one way or another, all a part of the overall journey home. But a journey across many dangers and perils is not the only type of journey we see in the Odyssey. There is an entire half of the story that takes place through the eyes of his son, Telemachus. Since Odysseus has been away for 20 years, he is presumed dead, and his family doesn't want to fully admit that he is likely not coming home. Other people are aware of this, and there are men trying to marry Odysseus' wife Penelope in order to inherit all of his property. These men, dubbed the suitors, essentially throw party after party at Odysseus' estate, eating all his food, drinking all his wine, mistreating his servants, and wooing his wife. Telemachus, just barely 20 years old, has to try and defend his family's estate from these wicked men. The arcs seem disjointed at first, until toward the end of the story, Odysseus does return, and he and his son unite and formulate a plan to win back their home. The story switches back and forth between Odysseus on his journey home and Telemachus on his journey of becoming a man, learning how to defend his family and his honor. It ends with a fight that reminds one of the bloody battle scenes that populated the chapters of the Iliad. All of these storytelling devices, the clever hero archetype, the usage of flashbacks, the hero's journey, they all come from the Odyssey. If you have a story in your head that makes usage of these styles, you have Homer to thank. It has been a massively influential story, spawning hundreds, if not thousands of tales after it that pay homage in some way, shape, or form to the Odyssey. But is it actually any good? Well, that depends on the reader. Despite interactions with gods, goddesses, mythical creatures, and more, the Odyssey feels like much more of a human story than the Iliad. It's more down to earth, focusing on the struggles that individuals face as they endure hardships in life. The Iliad, by contrast, is a cosmic struggle between superheroes and gods, all performing miraculous feats. Odysseus is a character who makes mistakes. He does things that get his men killed. He has to reel in his own arrogance on more than one occasion, and he even has an affair with a goddess, despite journeying home to see his completely and utterly faithful wife. It can be downright depressing at times. In a lot of ways, it's a much more realistic story than its predecessor, the Iliad. You, the reader, have to decide which type of story you prefer to read more. Nonetheless, its adherence to humanity's flaws is part of why it resonates so much. People are drawn to a story with a protagonist who they can relate to. Just don't cheat on your spouse, alright? Every person on Earth has their own odyssey through life, a journey where they encounter hardships, success, and try to achieve their own goals. The Odyssey doesn't end with Odysseus being stranded on an island. He is determined to make it home. How well you do on that journey depends on the choices you make. If you make poor choices, your Odyssey will be harder. If you make better choices, perhaps the sailing will be smoother. So set sail and get out there. Thanks for watching. With Christopher Nolan's film adaptation of the Odyssey coming out soon, I thought it would be a good time to talk about this tale and why we're still telling it thousands of years later. This is Max with The Classics, a channel dedicated to discussing the classics of all kinds. I hope the winds for you are favorable and you can sail home safely.